Welcome to Will's Personal Development Podcast. My name is Will, and today I'll be doing a summary and reflection and learnings from the book Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. It's a very famous book these days, and it's about a man who overcame a very tough childhood and ended up breaking the pull up world record, the most pull ups ever done, and then also uh, achieving some monumental feats in terms of the Navy SEALs and the Air Force and getting to high levels in many of those organizations. And then on top of that, uh, becoming a champion in ultra marathon running. So I want to give a shout out to my friend Justin, who recommended me do this specific topic, and I'm sure he would enjoy this topic. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, if you want a more thorough summary and review of the book, I will be posting this on my blog, willyoulaugh.com, and there's going to be a text version of this, which goes much more into depth. But this is more of a kind of free flow conversational podcast version. You'll still gain a lot of insights, but for those who want to be more thorough, we also do have that blog version. Now, I think the first thing I want to say is that I didn't initially want to read this book. And to explain that, you see, this book, with just like many other books, they get very popular in the young manosphere online. A lot of young men just really like these kind of tough guy books, and something just draws them to people who accomplish incredible physical feats or do very tough stuff revolving the army or navy. And of course, it was recommended to me as well as other books by Jordan Peterson and so forth. And while I'll consider the recommendations, I don't necessarily just read a book because everyone else is reading it. I don't necessarily just follow the crowd for that reason. I ask myself, is this a book that's useful to me and my goals? And initially, I wasn't aligned with that. So I think that's something that I want you to consider and think about. Are you just kind of following the crowd, or doing some reading a book or learning about something because it's flashy, or um, because they're doing something, but uh, not because it relates to how it can improve your life? And maybe I think some of these people think it does, or maybe they just find it entertaining. But for me, I take a practical approach. So ultimately, I was like, you know what? I don't really need to become a Navy SEAL or go through this tough stuff or have to deal with this incredible trauma as a child. So I didn't necessarily know much about him, but of what I knew and of the book and of similar books. I know Jocko Willink is another one who is kind of a similar story. I just never really gravitated to that. Of course, I got recommendations in person, online about it, and I'm like, I'm trying to just, earn a good amount of money, love what I do for a living, those type of things. So sorry, I'm going to have to put this to the side. And then I did that for a while, but I guess I got tempted. I think it was a mixture of factors. One, I wanted to get better at pull ups. I think health and fitness started to become more of a thing for me, and I really wanted, I guess I put this metric of 15 or 20 pull ups strict as this big goal I had. It seemed like very large, insurmountable, and a measure of my health. And so I had that in my mind recently, and I was like, okay, maybe this book is starting to become a bit more relevant. And so that's the basic precursor. So let's stop talking about that and just get into some actual tips about this book. So I think the first thing the book covers is his childhood. It's basically a memoir about his life. And I highly encourage you to read the audiobook version because, put simply, the audiobook version comes with a commentary, and he makes a lot of mistakes in the book because he rushes into things full force. And the audiobook version really clarifies that these are mistakes more than the text version, which can get people the wrong idea. But anyhow, he grew up in poverty and had a lot of physical and mental abuse from his father. So I think the first part of the book, I would say the first quarter of the book, really is about his childhood and those defining moments. His father was clearly someone who he was against, he didn't like, and the big villain of his life. He was beaten hundreds of times, um, and his dad would find every possible reason to beat him. And there would be welts on his back, and that was his form of discipline if he did anything out of line, even if he was riding his bike and he just grazed the road by accident when his father told him not to touch the road. His father also beat his mother senseless, and at that time, in that era of life, um, calling the police wasn't helpful because when his mom would call the police, the police would just look it over, and um, if there's no clear, obvious evidence, the police would believe the male over the female. So when that happened, it would just be useless. So it was a very traumatic part of his life, and then on top of that, um, you know, they they had to split up at one point. What I mean by that is his mom one day chose to take the children and run away. But of course, it was an emotional wreck for her. When they ran away, his brother wanted to stay with his father. His brother preferred his father. So that was a mess. So only David went. And on the trip, she emotionally broke down because basically her car broke down when she ran away. She tried to find somewhere to live. The only hotel in the area was fully booked. So she was basically like emotionally depleted and given up. Ultimately, David had to step up, and it probably affected him emotionally at that time too, because he was still a kid. But he realized his mother had pretty much completely broken down emotionally, and he had to kind of step up and do something because they were on their last legs there, and they couldn't go back. But it was almost like, oh geez, everything's telling you like you have to go back. Your car breaks down, the hotel's fully booked. Ultimately, and I'm actually giving some insights that I didn't write in the text version. So there's a little back and forth. This podcast version may have some extra insights, but eventually, like, I think they called their uncle or something, and they were able to find a place. But that was another emotional, memorable moment in David's childhood. So essentially, I think one of the big lessons I learned from this part of the book, which he emphasizes, is that life will deal some people a really bad hand, and some people just kind of use that to become a victim, complain, give up, get very bitter about life. And that's not the right way of doing it. That's the way David did it for many, many years, but he realized that you have to turn that into a strength. You have to turn those challenges into something that's positive. And that's not something easy. It's not something that you can just pick up. It can take years and years to train yourself to do that. But that's the right mindset. And I found that very, very powerful. It's one of the surprising things I found very useful in the book. I've gone through my own share of struggles. Of course, nothing as singular and traumatic as that, but I've definitely gone through a bunch of struggles. Problems making any friends, problems finding work, problems in other areas of my life, and it's so easy to just go into this state where you're just like, man, the world sucks. It's over. I'll never figure it out. I'm doomed. And it just gets you very negative, gets you very bitter. And sometimes with certain people, which is just awful because they're awful to other people, they will tear down others because of it. And that just sucks being around those people. But, it doesn't change your situation. So his first exercise in the book is to record your bad hand in life, whatever that is. It's different for different people. And then with that bad hand, be specific. Don't be too vague or short. Realize that your challenges can be turned into great power with the right mindset. Most people get it wrong because they adopt a woe is me attitude. Instead, say you can turn this into a positive. David's way was saying, I've went through all this horrible crap in my life, so I've become stronger and tougher than most people because of that. So you can't hurt me because of these things. I believe it's hard to figure out what exactly it is, but there is a way. And with Napoleon Hill's books, Think and Grow Rich, he believes not only is there a way, but there's a way of turning it into an equal or greater, usually greater, positive thing. For me, I think one thing that's always been on my mind is, dating is just so hard for me. I've been dealt a bad hand. It's partially because I'm Asian living in America, and that makes it harder because Asian men aren't seen as great. Woe is me, I'm screwed. I'm only left with, the trash heap of women who would still be interested. And that's such a negative attitude, and it's hard to come back from that or turn it into a positive. But if I were to turn it into a positive, I would say something like, while I have all these challenges, it's pushed me to become a better person and more attractive man and live a better, more exciting life for my own benefit, for my own enjoyment. And because of that, it will probably find me a better woman than I ever would have if I didn't have these challenges, because I probably would have just settled with something that was doable rather than pushing me to become so amazing that now I have to find something. Now I can get something even better. I don't know, just an idea to get your brain juices flowing. So that was the first quarter of his book, and then I think the rest of the book transitions to his Navy and Army and Air Force life. His sights were set at on the Navy SEAL initially, and this was incredible. I think this was the most defining part of the book because it was really his 180 transformation. So at the time, so he was basically an adult now, but he hated his job. He weighed over 300 pounds, and his job was basically a really disgusting job in a sense. He was a exterminator, and he had to deal with all sorts of rodents and pests, and work into the night sometimes. And in terms of his personality and his sense of self, it sucked as well. He would mask his true self with the exterior, with food, junk food, because he wanted to look tough and intimidating. But deep inside, he was a coward. And so it was just a complete mess of a person at that point. He was scared inside, but he masked that with his gang-like appearance. He would kind of try and come off like a gang member of the street, even though that wasn't him. And he would mask himself by trying to gain weight by eating. And then, of course, he hated his job. So that really sucked. And I think, as you can tell, the book is oftentimes about like kind of like an extreme story of him probably worse off than you are now, getting to, as you'll see, somewhere better than maybe you are now. So I'm very proud of him, but at the time, he really kind of sucked. And at some point, he just decided I'm kind of fed up with this and I want to change my life. And he just burrowed on this idea of becoming a Navy SEAL as the ultimate tough, awesome, hardcore thing to do. And so he said, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it in under like 6 months. So he started to go crazy. Uh, the first time he chickened out halfway through the Navy training because it was so difficult. Um, but I mean, he really went for it. Still, he would he started to go on extreme diets to lose weight because there was like a cutoff like for how much weight you could have, which was like much less. Like he had to lose like 100 pounds or something. Um, so the second time, um, he was more successful because there's a lot of things that he had to do. It wasn't just the physical part where he had to lose all this weight, learn how to swim well, and by the way, he was scared of swimming. But there's also the brain side of it. He had to pass a aptitude test, so he had to study, and so he has these challenges in the book. I mentioned the first one, but the second exercise is to have some type of physical accountability mirror, so that you can be constantly reminded of what you need to do. And it can't be digital because it won't work. You have a duty to complete that task. And for him, he was at rock bottom, so he really pushed to be accountable for things. He would go to the gym for like an hour or more, and if he decided not to do a workout, which was often because at that state of his life he was lazy, he would drive home and then he would allow that part of himself to just beat himself up and say like, you screwed up, you let it slide. And then he would force himself to go back to the gym, drive back, and then do that exercise, and sometimes double of what he skipped out on. He says people will judge you and it won't feel good, but then they forget about that and judge others. Try not to judge others because sometimes you're wrong or it's hurtful. I think this was incredible, but eventually he lost the 100 pounds, barely passed the written exam after studying really, really hard, and pretty much skimping out and going from this diet of junk food to a very regimented diet of grilled chicken, exercising, and really hating it. Like he was hungry every night. But he just decided to do it, and this was a point where I was like, wow, like I don't know if anyone else could like really do that 180. Like we've all tried to improve our diet, and that's hard. But I think it was just a point where he just needed to change his life. So he says people want an easy solution to becoming mentally tough. He gets asked that a lot, but they already know the answer, and it's going to be painful. You have to do what you don't want to do. It's not about passion or enjoyment. And I found this very interesting because, there's other gurus, Gary Vaynerchuk and stuff, who, sometimes they'll say, you have to eat that dirt. But other times they'll say, like, you have to find something you just love and enjoy. And if you do that, it'll never feel like a day of work. But then, like, David's just saying, that's not the case. If you want to become mentally tough, at least, it's going to hurt. And so I believe both are needed. Some things, yeah, maybe if you find a job in drawing or graphic design and you really love art, you'll never have to work a day in your life. But the other things, like exercising, losing a lot of weight, it's gonna hurt no matter what at some point, and there's no way around that. Sure, you can find some forms of exercise that are more fun than others, but Stop trying to skirt around it. It's gonna hurt, and it's not gonna be fun. But that's how you train your willpower. His third challenge is to keep doing something outside of your comfort zone. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but something that is sustainable. Maybe it's making your bed, doing the dishes. Once you get to that comfort level, increase the duration of that run or activity. And really, that was his secret to prepping for the Navy SEAL and doing all this other stuff. He had to do a lot of physical exercise too, like becoming a Navy SEAL. Like you have to do these ridiculous amounts of swimming, running, push-ups, and all sorts of exercises in the rain, without any life vest and stuff like that. So that was his secret, and that's what he used later on, as you'll see, to become a ultra marathon runner. He says he brainwashed himself to enjoy the pain. Each time he didn't want to go out, he would force himself to. And he had this like crazy mentality where he would do it to an extreme. Like anything he really hated, he would lean into. So if it was snowing, raining, he would run in that and do more. So that's crazy. I don't know if you have to go to that extreme, because he says later on that you don't have to go full out like he did, but there's that. So anyhow, I think this section of the book really covers in detail like how his Navy SEAL Hell Week was. It basically, if you're not familiar, Hell Week is that week of training where you're basically auditioning to be a Navy SEAL. It is the ultimate like test to kind of weed out a lot of applicants, and it's really really difficult. Sometimes the rain's pouring down on you. Others are being tested on a mental level, and based off how you come across, it can be make or break. Some of these people, they come off very cocky and strong, but they'll find ways of like finding a mental breakdown point. And David didn't make it the first time, I believe. And then the second time he made it, but then because he was injured coming out of Hell Week, he couldn't proceed, so he had to do it again a third time because of his injury. So that really sucked, but he was still so exhilarated because, I mean, he made it through. He made it through the whole thing, and it was just because of an injury he couldn't control that, he got taken out. But that was really interesting. So for David, he specifically used this mind game to get him through. And basically what his mind game was this idea of taking someone's soul. That's the basic, I guess you could call it, name that he coined for this mind game. But he basically, it's this whole like game he plays with himself where he's like, I'm going to take someone else's soul. And I see it as, taking someone's energy, motivation, away from them. So it's situation dependent, as he says, and doesn't always mean defiance. But when you take someone's soul, it's when you you kind of almost demoralize them or like prove that, oh, you think that I'm done, not even close. And so it can be used in different situations. Like if you're being bullied, it means being able to laugh at yourself when someone tries to make fun of you. For a job interview, it can mean showing your weaknesses rather than laughing at them. So, I think based off the internet, I think there's a different interpretation of it, but essentially you're taking away the power that someone has in you. And during Navy SEAL training, the instructors, they would push on someone if they see a weakness. They would kind of exploit it and kind of see like, oh, okay, like if you're dragging behind, they'll kind of lean into that, make you do more work, and that's a way of kind of demoralizing you further and getting you to quit, even if there's pouring rain and you have to carry a giant raft. So with David and his crew that he was auditioning for, they were pushing him, and they were doing stuff to like mess with your psyche. They were taking it easy and drinking coffee in front of them. Um, but David believes everyone has their demons. So he wanted to occupy the real estate in their mind by showing that you couldn't mess with him and his crew, even on their worst day. And so when they tried to kind of push his crew, he doubled down and made his crew enthusiastic and energetic and told them to carry the boat above their heads. And so when the instructors saw that, they just kind of gave up. They're like, okay, you can't really mess with this crew. Like whatever you do, they're just going to keep pushing harder. And so they just kind of, their disbelief just kind of invigorated them, and they just gave up on pushing that crew. They knew this crew was going to make it through. So that's one way of doing it, of taking someone's soul in a way. And so that's just a way, interesting method. I never really saw it as the best method or the right method. It could be, it could not be, but a new method that you could potentially try using to succeed. So yeah, the second quarter of the book, as mentioned, is on his attempts to become a Navy SEAL, and how crazy the Hell Week was. You had to survive. You're basically thrown into the water and without anything. And when the waves are running and the storm is brewing, and half the time you feel like you're drowning, it doesn't help at all. And you're almost dying from how cold it is. It's a horrible thing. And when they'll make it even worse, if they feel like you are more scared of drowning or you can't swim as well, sometimes the instructors will see that and double down on you on that, to kind of push you further. They might, I think for David, they saw that in him, so they made him swim more. They made him swim with less things. They made him swim farther. It's kind of cruel, really cruel. I don't know if that's even ethical. To a point where I really I was wondering while reading this, like some of these people could die auditioning, and that's kind of cruel. But that was the second quarter of the book, and it goes into much more detail in the book, but it really talks about the negativity, the harshness, the bad thoughts that come into your mind, and how how David kind of got a second wind and used himself. I wrote down, you can get a second wind of energy by activating your sympathetic nervous system through using your challenges as strengths. And this is kind of his cookie jar analogy. He says negative thoughts will block the activation of your sympathetic system, but David decided to check his past challenges in life, kind of like cookies in a cookie jar, to make him stronger, whereas others were worse off because of their weak mindset and weak, easy life. So each time he got down, he used his cookie jar to kind of get him back up. So, it goes into a lot more detail, like into his injuries. Like his knees got super swollen. He had to take a bunch of pills just to get by, tape up his legs and stuff, to slip by his injuries. And it was a huge issue. He was going through a divorce as well, and he was $30,000 in credit card debt. So he was just a total wreck of a life. And he got kicked out because of his injured knee. But incredible thing, I think what pushed him through was somehow in his mind he set the Navy SEAL as the ultimate test, the ultimate thing. And I think he saw how far he had come from how far he was, and I think that really pushed him to pull through. So, he came back, he tried again on his second Hell Week, and, he learned a lot from his first time, and he knew things that other applicants didn't. He saw people talking a big game, and he knew that would turn against him because you really have to work with your team rather than as an individual. And those people who were super tough, while they were good in the first couple of days, they started to crack. So, long story short, he made it through. He became a Navy SEAL. Incredible story. And that's when you get to the kind of middle of the book, where he ultimately became interested in ultra marathon running. Now, keep in mind, he was a full-time Navy SEAL, and he made it through all this crap, and then he's moved on to other things. I think part of him, if I were to understand why he did this, because he did something crazy. Part of him, I think he just wanted to. I think part of him still wanted to show that he was the ultimate king, and he still hadn't really proven it to himself. He still wanted to push himself to the next level. So he heard about how there were 100-mile ultramarathons. And keep in mind, this is a guy who is still like 250, 200 pounds, and his only training is powerlifting. He hears about this, and then he signs up for a 100-mile ultramarathon with no training, and the race is in 3 days. So completely ridiculous, and I disagree with his methodology here. With no prep or training, it's just unhealthy and unreliable. You shouldn't do that. And that's one of the big gripes I have with the book. I think he doesn't emphasize that enough in the text version. And that's why I recommend the audiobook version if you ever get it, because he does explain, like, you shouldn't do this. I messed up. I always kept rushing into these things with no training. Instead, you have to do that gradual process of just slowly pushing your comfort zone. But he does this, right? And he has no training. He eats Hostess chocolate cakes right before the event. And they do a heavy powerlifting session the night before. So he's built like a linebacker, and he runs this thing. And of course, it goes terribly for his body. Like his legs are all screwed up. But he makes it 20 miles, 30 miles, 40 miles. And he keeps going. And he's like this big guy in a sea of like skinny athletes. And he's actually doing really well. From miles 15 to 25, he was actually in 5th place. However, there's a lot of experienced people there, pacers and instructors, and they're telling him, like, you have to slow down. You're not pacing yourself well. You're in 5th place, but you have to slow down. And he didn't listen. So he was in 5th place from miles 15 to 25. But he doesn't continue. And, he's doing this without training. And by he gets to mile 70, right? Which is incredible. And he has stress fractures. He does what he can. I think he takes duct tape out and tapes his legs together. Kind of how he did in Navy SEAL Hell Week. He basically, I think in Hell Week he had all sorts of other issues, like I think his feet were swollen and all sorts of stuff, and so he just duct taped himself together. And so essentially he got to mile 70, and he used his cookie jar analogy to keep pushing through. And he completed it. He completed the 100 miler, which was crazy, with no training. And by the time he got there, his toenails had fallen off. And while it was an incredible feat, he was also kind of disappointed because essentially, though he was very invigorated and excited. My bad. He wasn't disappointed, but the thing was, he wanted to do this because he had found out that there's a kingpin of ultra marathons, and I think it was called Badwater, and he wanted to race in that one, but to do that it was application only, and the organizer rejected him immediately when he reached out. But he kind of sarcastically said that if he ran another 100-mile race within a certain time, he'd reconsider. So he ran this one to kind of build that resume for it. And he had finished it. So here's the thing. He's doing this for charity. I think it was some type of soldier charity. Wounded warriors. And he had done this. But, in terms of that actually working towards his application, he wasn't sure initially. I think he sent in the application and said, hey, he reached back out and said, hey, I did it. I ran the 100-mile ultra marathon. Do I qualify for Badwater? I don't think he heard a response. So in a sense, he was so proud of his achievement in a way, but he was still not happy about it. So that was very interesting. He throws in another exercise here, which is commit or do something physical or mental. Then break that record, because you'd be surprised how much you can accomplish. If it's pull-up or books to read per month, you can do more. So you'd be surprised how far you can go, as David illustrated, by running a 100-miler with no training. He also gives a tip on procrastination here. He never procrastinates on big projects because he sets these looming deadlines. With the whole Navy SEAL application, he had 3 months to lose 100 pounds, or that was it. So there's no room for procrastination there. With the 100-mile marathon, he had to pad his resume some more. So the next one on his list was Hurt 100, which, he's telling his Navy SEAL co-workers that he's doing this at the same time. He's training and doing all this stuff while working full-time as a Navy SEAL. So now he's on to the Hurt 100. And when he shows up, all the other runners tell him, dude, you're not prepared. You don't have the training. You have the equipment, the food. He has no idea that you need certain saline salt packages and all this other stuff. And again, as I mentioned, it's one of the big gripes I have with the book. Some people is going to read just the book version and realize and believe, you just want to throw yourself into things like he did. If you read the audiobook commentary, you will learn that he found out and realized this is a mistake. You want to prepare, train, gradually build up to this. But at the time, he's this young kid. He was just flinging himself into this. And so, he didn't have the equipment or all the stuff once again. Some of the runners helped him out and gave him some equipment. But, yeah, he wasn't prepared. And this run was different because there's all sorts of roots and rocks sticking out in the incline. So you had to be prepared to be tripped and stuff to hit your shoes all the time. So at this point, he's running this race, and he gives another tip while he's doing so in the book, which is that there's a governor in your brain that tells you you're out of energy and to give up. when in reality you've only used up about 50%. So how do you keep going? You have to retrain your mind's programming to tolerate more and more pain. And there's no shortcut for this. It's a skill that takes years of pushing your comfort zone and pain threshold to teach your mind that you can handle more. So David ended up walking the last 20 of the Hurt 100. And he wasn't a master of his mind yet, so that was part of the issue. And he looking back, he believes he only used about 60% of his capacity. Despite that, his wife had to carry him to his hotel. And at least, I was impressed because he still finished it, which is crazy, crazy little thing there. And he got lapped. He got lapped by the winner, but he was inspired by that. He said, like, during those types of races, you're on your own. Like, you don't see anyone else. You're out there in the middle of the night with a headlamp, and it's just you and yourself. Because the race is so long. No one else is even close to you. So at this point, David makes a remark. He says, of course, genetics plays a role. He's not saying that genetics don't play a role. Like, everyone can't be LeBron James, but he is saying that if you change your thinking, you can achieve a state that you would have never thought possible. Everyone can pull out more energy and motivation when you compete with yourself rather than compete with others. You can start to feed off them and run their race rather than look inside and compete with yourself. So there's that. He finishes Hurt 100, and you have to. He reemphasizes the whole methodology of. He calls it the 5-10% rule. You push until you can't push anymore. And then the next time, you push 5 or 10% harder than that. If the max push-ups you've ever done is 100, do 105 or 110. So, very gradual but useful process. So David ended up getting into Badwater. It's a very strict, rigorous, slow acceptance rate, but he ended up applying for it. So this was the big bad ultra marathon, and this is something that he had actually prepared more for, trained for. He pulled out a lot of stops for this as well. This is a race that he watched videos of others run, and he started to train more for, because this is a race in the heat, like extreme heat. He would wrap on 7, 8, 10 layers of sweatpants on himself to simulate the heat he would have to endure. And he would run, go on these massive runs before work. And then when he would show up at work, he would take off all the layers and then drain all the sweat off, like wring his sweatshirts of all the sweat. In a way, it was kind of bad in my eyes. Like, you're basically dehydrating yourself to an extent. But, he would always lean into this to kind of simulate the heat that he had to compete in. So he actually finished 5th place, which was crazy. But he didn't feel as good about it as he could, because he felt like he could have pushed more. He felt there was more potential in him. So it was still a good learning lesson, and accomplishing this great feat was awesome. And he could start to see the potential of being able to eat out every tiny bit of what he had in him. So he's still doing this stuff for charity, and at this point now he started to turn his eyes towards ultramarathons, Ultramans. So with Ultramans and Ironmans and stuff like that, it's not just running, it's biking, it's swimming. And you have Ironmans who are already these extreme events where you have to run marathons and then bike for long periods of time, swim for long periods of time. But with David, he decided to do Ultramans, which are basically Ironmans on steroids. It's like double whatever you do for an Ironman. So with this one, he went to Hawaii to compete, and I can't remember if he prepared or trained for this. I think he did. He started to train and prep more, but still not enough. Like he bought a, he had certain things ready. He was obviously practicing swimming and biking and stuff. Now he was prepping. So he was on a good course. So he starts this Ultraman, and he kind of knows where he's good and where he's not. He really thinks that he can blow anyone else out of the water on the running portion because of his ultra marathon background, and the others, aren't as good runners. So he's running this thing, and it's going really well, and he gets to the biking portion, and he blows out his tire, which costs him over 20 minutes to get fixed. They have to wait for someone to come in and to get it fixed. And there's like a spare bike, but it's not the right type of bike. And so he decides to wait. And there's no, like, from what I could tell, there's like no penalty or handicap. Like if your bike gets blown out, they don't give you like a 20-minute time back or anything, which I think is unfair in terms of the rules. But he's stuck there waiting for 20 minutes. But he gets it fixed, and he starts to get back in the race, and he's trailing the first place person, and he knows, once I get to that run, I would just catch up on him. So he's pushing his pace, and he's just comparing himself to the first place person, and just thinking about that all the time. And he was so sure he was a better runner. So they get to the run portion, and he just takes out super hot. He pushes himself, and he crashes. I think he pushes himself to go too fast initially in the first few miles. He didn't pace himself well. Because he was just thinking about catching up to the first place person ahead of him, and it cost him the whole thing. He finished second place, which still is a monumental feat, but to him he felt really bad about it, and he believes that he lost because he stopped running his own race and started comparing himself to the guy ahead of him, which caused him to not pace himself in the run, which cost him the run, even though he was the better runner. He also, looked back and realized if he had just taken the secondary bike, which was good enough, he probably could have made up some time. So, tons of things, tons of learning lessons. I think he could have more emphasized the whole prep and training thing. I think he beated himself up too much. I mean, winning second place, huge feat. And on top of that, part of it's just about learning lessons from preparing and training. If he had the right equipment ready, then he could have had a second bike, same exact model, ready, with maybe someone driving and trailing him. He could have lost no time. Or maybe he could have talked to the judges and got that handicap of the time he lost back. So here he gives another tip, which is that patience, talent, and are secondary to a strong work ethic. David's work ethic contributed most to his success. You have 160 hours in a day, and you should be doing more than a 40-hour work week. You have enough time to work hard, spend with family, get your nutrition and exercise together. This is something that I've known for a while, and it's something that I think I'm surprised how many people will kind of argue against it. And I think um, there's this one. It's a common saying, but it's so true. There's this one Facebook post where the founder of digitalmarketer.com he basically posted about it, and I saw the comments, and it was just so many people arguing, whining, complaining, or just saying, "Oh, well, that doesn't apply to me. I have a family. I have a child, and I have to take them out, and I have to feed them, and I have to clothe them, and I have to take care of them." And yeah, while that's true, let's say you have a 40-hour work week, and then you have to sleep, and then you also have 40 hours of taking care of your child. I mean, that's still 40 hours left. But they would argue and complain, and then the founder of Digital Marketer would reply back and kind of say like, okay, that's, to your point, that's true, but even still, you still have more time than you think. But I was astounded how much people would argue back and forth. And I truly believe that if people would map out every minute of their day, like write it out on a piece of paper, like I have, you'll be amazed how much extra time you still eke out on a daily basis. It's just kind of how it is. Every time you switch tasks, write it down for an entire day. And you might find, oh, I still have 3.7 hours because I spent 14 hours on Instagram, or 13 minutes on Instagram, 7 minutes checking my phone, 5 minutes chatting with my friend, and all those things add up over time. And those are the things people don't notice when they're taking care of their baby. So, I try to be helpful actually in that Facebook post, and I talked to one of the moms, and I was like, I think, you are right, but maybe, yes, it does apply more to the guy who's single, who doesn't have a family. But I really think everyone still has a lot more time in the day than they think. Unfortunately, I think the founder took that the wrong way, and he commented back at me, almost like attacking me and saying, "Oh no, it does apply to everyone, even if you have a family or whatnot." And he kind of highlighted a thing that he shouldn't be highlighting. He should have been siding with me in my main point, which is that this still applies to everyone to an extent. And so, I don't know if he was trying to start an argument with me, but I was like, okay, I'm just going to let it go there. But still, I think, very true here. We all have 160 hours in a week, not in a day. So you have so much more to do. So get it done. Always be ready to adjust to the unexpected when it happens, so that you make the most of it rather than let it get you down. If you're a runner and you get injured, use the opportunity to do more yoga and improve your flexibility, which will prevent more injuries in the future. If you're a guitar player and you break one hand, sit down and learn a new musical instrument or skill. David's new challenge for you is to document every moment of your day with timestamps. This will provide a baseline for how much time you waste in the day. Most people waste 45 hours, maybe this is minutes, or 45 hours a week, and you can easily spot a lot of fat with this method. Then start trimming the fat. Stop multitasking and focus on a task. Multitasking causes many people to do half the work. Focus on the task at hand and nothing else. Work on not using social media or email. By the third week, you should have a set calendar based on what you've discovered, so that you can start to build a solid routine and solid habits. David's unexpected event occurred during this time. We're getting to the third chunk of the book, and this is when he had to deal with a lot of other issues in his life. He was this accomplished Navy SEAL, and he was also an accomplished ultramarathon and ultraman, but he started to get a lot of heart and breathing issues while he was training and running. He was seeing butterflies, getting dizzy, and it led him down this rabbit hole, which took him to uh, the hospital. He was feeling faint, couldn't even really walk straight. Turns out it was a birth defect, which was crazy because he had done all this training before with the birth defect in his heart. He had accomplished so much without noticing it, and so he had took few surgeries, a couple surgeries that were supposed to fix the issue, but it didn't fix the issue. He still had all this dizziness and stuff. And so, he had a lot to do with it, a lot of stuff going on. At this point, he says, no matter who you are, whether you're white, black, gay, straight, polka dot, rich, poor, you have to make it happen. Don't make excuses. I love that point. I love that point because, I think, at least for me, there's always stuff that holds me back. My ethnicity, my income level, my opportunities, where I live, everything. Those are just things that I've had to work on for years to extinguish as excuses, as things that hold me back and just make it happen. So essentially, he had to juggle with this heart condition, and at the same time, he still pushed and pushed and pushed. So while he was doing this, he had been working as a Navy SEAL and traveling all over the country to recruit new Navy SEALs. Basically, the African American demographic for Navy SEALs was very much lacking. So they asked David to go around recruiting because of his incredible story and how far he'd come. So he would travel the world, travel the nation, recruiting for Navy SEALs. Not the world, the nation. And you travel different countries, do all these runs and stuff, and invite these high school, college people to train with him. And he'd do a run, almost a half marathon, a marathon as training before his speech and his recruiting session, or and then afterwards he would invite them to join him on training sessions the next morning at like 5 a.m. And that would inspire people to become a Navy SEAL. On the flip side, he was dealing with this heart condition, and he had to go through more surgeries, and some of them would take time to prep for and many months to recover from to fix his heart condition. So he's doing all this stuff, and on top of that, he wants to be the most uncommon out of the uncommon. So, the Navy SEALs are pretty uncommon already, but for every division, there are divisions higher than that. So amongst the Navy SEALs, there are a squad of SEALs that get the toughest missions, the ones to find Osama bin Laden and stuff like that. And so he started to apply, not just for training to reach the SEAL squad, but also for trainings for other arms of the Army, such as the Air Force and the military. Since he figured there were different training models to develop him further in these other areas. His request got denied 6 times, but he got accepted to become to join the Army Ranger program, which was kind of like a similar tough, low completion rate thing. And so he's applying to all these things. He's applying to BUDS. He's doing the Army Ranger thing. And for some of these things, he doesn't pass. He gets very far initially, but some things he doesn't necessarily pass. he gets pretty far. I think with one of them, within the audition process, you basically have to use a map and then run to this destination. And it's very difficult because you have to map it out on the terrain. And if you take a wrong turn, you're done for. So I think the first time he tries it, he messes up. He gets like 6 of the checkpoints, but he takes a wrong turn, and he just doesn't make it. Um, so because of that, he doesn't give up, but he switches his gears and he tries out for a different faction of the. Um, I think he tries out for the Army Ranger thing and gets into that. Um, but he keeps trying these different things. If he doesn't get into the Bud's thing, he ends up trying again the second time. Here he gives a tip. He says, "Don't get soft or take things for granted." He noticed other men reap the rewards of their work and just cruise and stay at the level of comfort. And at this point, he's referring to all the other Navy SEALs. He saw a lot of these people, once they had reached Navy SEAL status, they just got really comfortable, really lazy. They weren't really working hard, training much, and they just started to let things slide. And he just really had a lot of disdain for that. And so he pushed himself, had these incredible, ridiculous training modals, despite already being a Navy SEAL. For me, I don't necessarily subscribe to his exact same model of just disdain or extreme physical training while you're a Navy SEAL. But I do totally ascribe to his idea of never being complacent or letting yourself slide or slip. I never want to be that person who makes $1 million, gets into the best shape of his life, and then just cruises from there, lets things slip, maybe just has a routine where you're just maintaining, and not just in a physical way as David has done, but in a mental way too. A lot of people who have successful companies, become CEOs, maybe they'll cruise, they start to stop pushing, stop learning. But there's so much you can continue to hone your mind in. There's always room for improvement. And if you get soft, that's where your business crumbles. That's where a competitor slips by you. And, I think for me at least, always continuing to push and grow and improve, it's really the magic of life. It's where you learn more, you get better at a skill, and you see the fruits of your labor, how far you can go, and it keeps you ahead of the pack rather than slowly slipping by. Anyhow, he ends up being a ranger, and he has this mindset where he's not superior to anyone. He has a pretty humble mindset, which I liked. He didn't want to. He didn't want to kind of come off as this guy who was already a Navy SEAL. He believes one reason he succeeded was his mindset of embracing the fact he was not superior. When he joined in military training, he acted and saw himself as just another person rather than this high flying Navy SEAL that thought that it was beneath him. So he went back to square one, kind of almost hid the fact that he was a Navy SEAL, and he wanted to learn what the Rangers had to offer. He ended up being a leader for 50 men, but he was disappointed in his performance. Looking back, he was a bad leader. He carried around this attitude of disappointment, which really didn't help anyone else out. He had these high standards and assumed that it would help people, push people to do the extra custom workouts that he was doing and he wanted others to do. But really that disappointment and disdain just kind of pushed people further away from him, and his subordinates really didn't follow him. I mean, you can really tell that he's grown and learned from his mistakes, which I like. You know, a lot of people just get stuck in the same ruts and continue to make the same mistakes as a leader. But in his commentary, he says, you know, you can't hold that against people. You know, you can't be like that. Instead of lording it over them or thinking you're better, you have to lift them up as well, encourage them to be the best versions of themselves. Rather than thinking you're superior and causing a rift, he should have encouraged them. So that was an interesting point. So now he's on his I guess last leg of the book, and he's taking on all these other segments of military life. He made it to a final selection of the Delta group, but he didn't make it in. And he felt like it was something with the interview process. So he passed all the physical things with flying colors, but with the Delta group, it's more than just the physical. There's a certain level of brotherhood and fraternity, and they were asking him questions along these lines. It was all interview questions focused on racism and being the only black person. And he says he'll never know for sure what made him get rejected, but essentially, you know, he had no problem, and he felt he was super tough. He could dish out anything that they dished towards him, because the interview questions were, you know, really pointed. They were like, you know, you're going to get a lot of flack for being a black person. Can you handle that? And he felt he could, but he feels like, you know, ultimately it came down to he wasn't a fraternity guy. He was kind of that lone wolf type of guy. And the interview questions focused on him fitting in, and he kind of was that lone wolf that could dish back anything that was dished at him. So unfortunately, it led to a kind of, I guess, more of a social thing in my eyes, where he just didn't come across as the likable enough character that would fit in with the group. So in this section, I found it interesting because it wasn't a story of, you know, he kept applying and he got into everything he pursued, and he just kept applying to different stuff, Delta Group, Air Force, and he got into everything. That wasn't the case. He never applied to Delta again. Like, that was it for him. And some of these things, you know, after his second or third rejection, it seemed like he just didn't try again. And I don't hold that against him, honestly. I think I was surprised, though, because it seemed like in the first 3/4 of the book, it was his character to keep trying until he got in. But I guess for some things, he just felt like, okay, that was it. Like, you know, I can't get in, or I had lost my interest in it. So instead of applying again to Delta, he tried out for the Air Force version. But along one of the last rounds of the test, he rolled his ankle, sprinting down some hills. He was flying through the physical tests with flying colors, but at that point when he rolled his ankles, like, he was done. Like, even if he wrapped it up and iced it, like, which, by the way, like, he did all the time in his other prior training, like with Hell Week and with Navy SEALs and stuff. He had like all sorts of injuries and stuff with the ultra marathons, and he had all sorts of shin sprains and shards. He would just duct tape that stuff up. But this time it wasn't enough, and he rolled his ankle and he couldn't make it through. But I think that was one of the ones where he did try again. The instructors encouraged him to try again, and I can't remember if he passed. He got in eventually or not, but you know, that was that. So, you know, his next challenge is for the uncommon among the uncommon, which isn't everyone. He says, you're going to have to make some sacrifices. Um, but basically, never get complacent. Keep pushing for greater levels of success. And it's going to upset the balance in other areas of your life. This is something that I totally think that, it's totally okay if you're not one of these people. Because sometimes that's not the right way of doing it, When you upset that balance, sometimes it's not worth it. Some things are more important, like spending time with your children, not being an absentee father. And some people are willing to give up that, being that absent father. I mean, if you look at Quincy Jones' documentary or a lot of these other people, they were not there for their child. A lot of billionaires and stuff, they regret that. So sometimes it's not worth it. The issue with being so uncommon is you rub a lot of people the wrong way. David didn't respect a lot of people. They didn't respect him. And he had a bad attitude, which I think, wasn't necessary. I mean, to an extent. I mean, they still may not have liked him, but I felt like he could have done it in a much more tasteful way. Still been very friendly and positive, but when you carry disdain like that, like I can relate to a lot of what he said, but I know now that's not the right way. I used to do that with my siblings, I thought that was the right way to lift them up, was to kind of show a little disdain because they weren't living up to my standards, my high standards. But that just kind of pushes them further away, and they feel like they can't reach that level, or you're just being this horrible, critical person. You have to lift them up in other ways. So, he's still dealing with this heart surgery thing. He has to wait 18 months between surgeries, which prevents him from doing a lot of the, physical stuff, training and auditioning. When he finally gets everything healed up, he asks his boss, his boss comes to him and says, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to travel to, I'll make it happen. And ultimately, he says, I want to apply to Delta again because that he has some unfinished business there. And his boss is like, are you sure? I mean, you could do any other thing. I could send you anywhere else as a Navy SEAL or so forth. But he was adamant about that. Unfortunately, he doesn't make it through Delta again. On his his first election rounds, he makes a wrong turn. He gets 5 checkpoints done, but that day he had 6 checkpoints, even though all the other days he only had 5 checkpoints. So he missed the protocol, and he didn't get that 6th checkpoint. So, from there he turns back to ultra running. And he's still doing these races and stuff. But then at one point, he's just feeling all sorts of pain, neck pain, tenseness. Everything's constricted, dizzy, health issues, all this crap. And this time, it's not the heart thing. His heart's healed up completely. And he talks to all sorts of doctors. They can't diagnose an issue. They can't figure out what the heck is wrong with him. It's not a tumor. It's not a heart condition. And so on the health standpoint, there's nothing wrong with him. So that's a huge issue. He can't do any running anymore. He gets dizzy all the time. So he turns his sights to the pull-up bar. And at this point, he sets his sight on the Guinness World Record, the most pull-ups to be completed in 24 hours. So, thanks to his Army, Navy training, he's very, very familiar with pull-ups. He's already done over 40,000 pull-ups in his life. So it's not like he's starting from scratch here. He'll break out hundreds of pull-ups on a daily basis already. So he's already kind of trained for it, and he starts prepping and training more for it. He goes on the Today Show with all these cameras and lights for his first attempt. Turns out that's a horrible mistake. The pressure, the lights, everything's wrong. The pull-up bar is all wiggly, And while he's doing it, everyone keeps asking to take a picture with him. He gets all nervous. He starts pacing faster than expected. And he has a massage therapist there to like work out the lactic acid. But, everything's a mess. He has a team trying to secure down his bar by taping it to the pipe, but it's still wiggly and stuff, which makes him have to work much harder than he usually does in training. And he planned to eat nothing but an energy drink, but it wasn't enough nourishment, so he orders a cheeseburger, which almost makes him puke. And so, he comes into this thing thinking like, okay, I can do this. Because when you work out the math, he only has to do like 6 per minute. That's it. It's just 6 every minute. But after 2,500 pull-ups, he's dead. He's done, and he gives up. I think with this type of thing, I was kind of, I was a little disappointed in terms of actual tips for my pull-up training, because my goal is not to do like X in X minutes or hours. I want to do 15, 20 strict without any breaks. And, with the Guinness World Record type of thing, like you can do like 1 pull-up a minute or 3 pull-ups every 20 seconds. And that's a different type of thing. It's like with rest in between. And I feel like that's a different type of training. Maybe not. But I don't know. I was kind of like, that's when I heard that, I was like, okay, that's a different type of thing. Nonetheless, I still got inspired and I got some tips from this. It's all about that 5 or 10% rule. In fact, I'm going to be doing pull-ups right after this, finishing recording this, using that 5 or 10% rule. I'm inspired. And pull-ups for me has been this whole constant struggle, because, I've gone from 0 to 2 to 3, and then back to 2, and then 4, and then back to 2 or 3, and then I stuck at 4 for a while, back to 3, and then I hit 7 at one point, and then now I'm back down to 2 or 3 with the quarantine. So it's been a whole struggle and issue. So yeah, I really just want to get better at them in the long run. So yeah, totally still interested and inspired and learning something here and there from this part of the book, but still not enough, not as much as I would have wished for, you could say. Anyhow, he decided to make a second attempt just 2 months later. This guy's crazy. He's always reattempting stuff immediately. And, he knew the second he failed the first time that he was going to attempt again. It was just his mindset, the way he is. So 2,500 was still a long ways off from the world record at the time. I think it was like 4,000 or something. But he tried again. He made adjustments based off his first time. This time, no cameras, no lights, smaller crowd. He had, I believe, a CrossFit gym cheering him on. He had a secure bar, salt tablets, gels ready. But this time his palms were just so torn up, they were essentially an open wound. He got several hundred pull-ups farther this time, but his palms were just on fire. His mom called a local physician during the attempt, and the physician basically told him, you have to stop. He had entered a phase of muscle fatigue, to a point where his muscles couldn't get enough glucose since it was secreting protein into the bloodstream to compensate. And the kidney usually filters out protein, but if it can't filter it out fast enough, it can cause death. So although it was super painful, David went with her second suggestion, which was not to quit, but to take these very, very painful injections into each of his palms to dull the pain. It was one of the worst pains he's experienced, but he didn't care because he was on a mission. So, this is like some crazy stuff. Like, once again, I think, part of me admires how crazy and amazing lengths he'll go to make it happen. Like, he's on this mission to endure incredible amounts of pain. He's playing that song on repeat at this CrossFit gym to go the distance. I forgot the name of the song, but it's basically about going the distance. And he has this like far-flung mindset of like, I'll do whatever it takes to make it happen, which I admire and I think is good. But I think one of the gripes I have is proper training and unnecessary pain and issues that you have to deal with. I think with better training, technique, and issues, I feel like he could have come in without destroying his palms as much. But maybe not. I don't know. As you'll see though in his third attempt, I think that's true. With better training and prep and equipment, like throughout this book, like you could have skipped a lot of injuries and issues. Anyhow, he still doesn't succeed this time. He gets closer, several hundred pull-ups, but he doesn't make it. And of course, immediately after his second failure, he has set his goals on his next attempt. So this third attempt is a month later. I think it's around January. His palms have healed up. And this time, he's smarter about it. He commissions a custom foam palm, I guess you would call it, glove from a mattress company. And it's not something that he tapes to his hands. He just holds them there. So it's this basic bit of foam. Guinness approves this. He reduces the amount of people further because he realizes he needs a very, very quiet place alone with his mind to do this. And here he gives a whole tip for readers, which is after a failure, you have to analyze your preparation and execution. His prep was good on his second attempt, but his execution wasn't as good. He believes his execution could have been better on his second attempt. His belief wasn't strong enough, and he had to eliminate all doubt on his next attempt. So, he updated his methodology as well. He realized that, although theoretically 6 per minute would get him there, you would break down before you ever got there with 6. So this time he started slower with 3 or 4 pull-ups every minute instead of 6. And because there's a threshold. I think it was around the 20-hour mark where he'd always give up. He would never make it past that with 6 per minute. Anyhow, he came in with this huge new mindset, new plan and preparation. And it was the 10-hour mark. And on the 10-hour mark, he realizes he usually takes a long break, and then that really derails things. So he told himself at the 10-hour mark, you can't take a big break. He would never have a break more than 5 minutes this time. And, this was very, very dangerous because with this type of attempt or, any type of 24-hour pull-up attempt, muscle failure can onset at any moment. You could be fine completely, and then the next pull-up, you're done. Like, your muscles completely tank out and fail. So, he retrained his mind. He saw the current record holder as this enemy that he had to beat, and he worked his mind to think that way. It wasn't anything personal against him. He had never met the guy, but he just needed every possible edge. And he did it. On his third pull-up attempt, he made it happen. He crossed the threshold, did a few more after that, and that was it, There wasn't much people there to celebrate, and he didn't do it for the adoration or celebration or press. He didn't do it for the money or the women. He did it for himself to prove how far he could go and how much of a badass he could become, and he did it for charity. And I think this is a crucial part of the book. I've experimented with many different forms of motivation, and there's many forms. People can do it for the adoration, for the money, for to prove it to themselves, or for a higher purpose, for charity. And I haven't come to a conclusive answer, but I think all of those things can work to a degree. But I think the weakest, the least sustainable, is when you're doing it for other people, for women, for approval. When you do it for a higher purpose, I think that's usually the strongest. When you think you're trying to change the world for a better place, I mean, you can usually pull out a lot more stops than anything else, because it matters so much more. So, wrapping up here, I'm going to end up the book summary and just wrap up with my own final thoughts and review of the book. Ultimately, he concludes the book with the pain and he's experiencing back from quitting ultramarathon running. There's still some type of health issue that's gut-wrenching, like super painful. Like he's feeling tense all over. He still can't run, and it's a huge issue, and it's to a point where he feels like it's life-threatening. Like he can't even get out of bed, and the doctors can't figure out what's wrong with him. And he's turning to alternative forms of treatment, more Eastern medicine, and he really sees that he could die. Like he could die the next day, and he looks back at his life and he feels content with that. He's seen how far he's accomplished, how far he's come, how much he's accomplished, where he started as this guy who really had this horrible life on all elements, and now he's turned it all around. And he's so proud of himself, and he's content if he dies that day. There's a few little other exercises here, Think about all the heart-wrenching and your recent failures. Journal them, not digitally. Think how you prepared and executed. Figure out what you did and how you can do better. Schedule your next attempt. But at this point, he just feels content and so happy. He's done all sorts of crazy stuff that he never would have thought he could do. He's skydived. He swam Great Lakes, even though he was scared of heights, and he was scared of drowning and he couldn't swim. And the book actually ends with him figuring out his issue and not dying. He believes the issue came from how inflexible he was. He was super, super inflexible, much, much more than the average person. And he started to think about that and think about one of his instructors who told him how inflexible he was and how he really needs to work on it. So he took his mindset, his discipline, and spent several hours a day stretching. And when he started, he was horrible. Like even the most basic stretches, like he couldn't do them at all. And he would spend hours doing them. And that made him much more flexible, and it seemed to imply that it had fixed all his tenseness and pressure issues. So that's huge as well. I'm definitely on the inflexible side, so I've definitely been working more on yoga and stuff myself. So that's something to keep in mind for me. So that's the end of the book. I was thoroughly surprised by the book. I didn't think I'd come into it learning as much as I did, because I didn't think it applied to me. But the whole thing with not just the physical stuff with the pull-ups and the pushing yourself, the 5 to 10% rule, the cookie jar rule, the flexibility stuff, but also the mental stuff I think I really relate to. And when I say mental stuff, it's not just mental stuff in terms of physical exercise. It's about your life, man. We've all dealt with trauma, big and small. Maybe it's small. Maybe it was just a bully in school, or growing up poor, or not fitting in school for whatever reason. Maybe it's your ethnicity, your background, how you looked, or maybe it's not fitting when you grow up, or having all these doubts in my head. I've mentioned a lot of these things apply to me. My race, not being popular, having a hard time being confident, um, dealing with my parents and what they expected of me and their arguments with me, and the expectations, which were sometimes too much. And then growing up into adulthood and dealing with all the other things I have to deal with. Trying to make a good living, trying to reach my dreams despite, having a limited budget, limited income, limited opportunities, not knowing where I want to go. We all have all sorts of things we deal with. And so did David. And even if they were less than David in a way, there's still things that hold us back, self-doubts. And I think one of the biggest lessons I learned from the book was the whole thing about living a good life, living a great life, and turning those issues into strengths. And David told you that it took many years to change that, many years to adopt this mindset of turning your demons into strengths. And that's something that I'm working on. I think I've gotten fairly good at, but still have a long way to go. And I recommend you start working on. And it could mean a different thing for you. For him, it means you can't hurt me anymore. I've gone through so many tough things. I'm much tougher than the average person. For me, it may be something different. I don't know what that means yet, but for me, it means, I've gone through some tough times, but each time I prove that I can succeed in different areas of my life. Despite that, is just the most inspiring story for me. And for me, that I've seen that in various areas. Still not to the extent I want it to, but in certain areas. I mean, I'd love to be a rich millionaire one day. That'd be great. But on small things, I've gotten a pretty decent muscle mass that's coming from the scrawny, skinny Asian self that I used to be. I'm pretty happy about that. I've still a long way to go, but I've grown there. I've done stuff that I didn't think I would be able to do in terms of bench press numbers, squat numbers, and certain skill type activities. Pull-ups, rope climbs, double unders. There were activities that I'd spent years trying to do and not making progress, and then finally hitting that, which was great because I never gave up. I kept going. And to move it past physical things to more mental things, I managed to get an incredible job that I never would have thought possible. I've managed to make great friends, network well, and this podcast is a great example. Look at all the guests I've gotten on, from authors of really well-known books to people who work for really well-known figures, Gary Vaynerchuk, to individuals who have accomplished a lot in their life, traveled to every country in the world, made tons of money through their career. I was able to, from scratch, because I believed in myself, get them onto my show. And I think part of that's due to some of the hardships I've went through. Knowing where I went, where I came from, the disadvantages that I perceive, whether they were there or not, and then just believing and pushing myself to say, what if it is possible despite these things, which is how they happened. I think I do have gripes about the book, as I mentioned. I really, once again, recommend the audiobook version because the author commentates it, adds extra input, and really emphasizes some of the things that he really thinks he did wrong. And I really recommend he does too. Not to plunge into things like he did. Don't just run an ultra marathon that you didn't practice or train for 3 days and sign up 3 days before. Even he admits that was the wrong way. You have to do it gradually. So that's something that wasn't emphasized enough in the text version, which I fear will get people to do it the wrong way. And also David's way, I don't think it's the only way. He has a very extreme method, kind of a rock bottom, full force method. There's different ways to motivate yourself and more gradual processes of doing that. Maybe for you, it's not, I want to become the best of the best, the most uncommon of the uncommon. Maybe it's just, I really feel overweight right now. And although it seems insurmountable, I want to look good. Maybe not a six-pack, but I just want to look relatively good for once, with muscles, with a lean stomach, and feel good. And that's still a lot of work, but you can do it. Sometimes the extreme things that David does can be counterproductive for certain people. That extreme hunger from dieting can cause you to binge or relapse in a huge way, or that's just not something that all of us can withstand. Honestly, some of the things he did, not just with the ultra marathon, but with some of the other things he adopted, I think they were a bit too much, maybe even foolish. I started to think about his inner psychology while I was reading his book, and ask myself why. Why does he do this? What is he really about? What is he trying to prove? And I believe part of it really has to do with his inner psychology. And I think he really does get very much more vulnerable and honest and in detail, which I really appreciate and respect. That's not easy for a man to do, and I think it's really helped out a lot of people. But I think he does it because, since he wasn't enough, he didn't have many friends. He was that dyslexic guy who did poorly in school, had to cheat in school to get by. He's almost kind of overcompensating in a way because of that. Because since he wasn't enough, since he was the weakest, he wants to be the strongest now. And I think from a psychology perspective, I can relate in some ways, but I believe ultimately to have a healthy mindset around this, part of it is coming to terms with the fact that you don't need to overcompensate. You don't necessarily need to be the best of the best. It's more about being okay with who you are, being okay and letting yourself know, believing that you are awesome, that you are loved, and so forth. And not having to pull out these extreme stops to become the best of the best for that to happen. And that's just my interpretation of it. Maybe a psychologist or psychiatrist or therapist can have a better, more professional explanation, but I couldn't help but read into that. So that's it for the book. I think I came out of it pleasantly surprised. I think I did learn more than I thought I would. And for me at least, unlike for others, I think a lot of people just, from what I could tell, just very pumped just about the whole ultra marathon thing, and they more so just focus on the physical benefits from the book because maybe they want to run a marathon. But for me, it's more about the life events, the life impact, the psychology, your mindsets. And that's really what helps you become a whole person, a happy person, a fulfilled person who doesn't let the trauma of their past define them. That I found much more impactful to me from the book. And I'm going to end it there. Subscribe, leave a rating. I guarantee you a rating on my podcast makes a huge difference for me to show up in the rankings. So if you like this, please leave a review on my podcast on Apple Podcasts. And I'm going to go do some pull-ups now, break my previous record, do some more than I usually do, and get going from there, just like David suggested. Thanks for listening, and hope you learned something.